full screen, please. Thank you. Yeah, so I couldn't share the presentation properly today, so it's being shared on my behalf by Tim. So yes, I'll be having to ask for the next slide when I'm ready there, but I'm not there yet, Tim. So AIM, we were established in December of 2000 and began life as a support group with a real commitment to raising awareness and delivering really important support to people on the autism spectrum and their families and caregivers. And so today AIM has grown and it's developed into a really kind of specialised adult service that we are really proudly commissioned to provide post and pre-diagnostic support to autistic adults by the NHS North Cumbria Integrated Care Board, and that's in South Tyneside, North Tyneside and Sunderland, and as well by CNTW, the Cumbria Northumberland Tyne and Weir Foundation Trust, in Northumberland particularly. And so what I'd like to talk to you today is about the work we do specifically in Northumberland. And when an adult receives an autism diagnosis, there's no sort of one size fits all reaction. We see a whole spectrum of emotion in the work that we do. So for some, it's it's a quiet sort of confirmation. It's a validation of something that they've known deep down for a very long time. But for others, it's a complete surprise, and that can spark quite a sudden and a deep reevaluation of their entire identity. We see many people who, find it a source of comfort. Finally, they found a reason why certain parts of their life have always felt like such an uphill struggle. But for some people, we also see anger. It's a very real and justified anger that this was missed by professionals for decades, leaving some people to wonder what their lives might have been like had they known this as a child. Now, we're acutely aware that without specific autism training and awareness, that many professionals won't know what to look for. So it's not necessarily their fault. But regardless of whether that diagnosis kind of brings relief or shock or grief, almost everybody reaches the same sort of crossroads. They look at that piece of paper that they get, telling them that they meet the criteria for an autism diagnosis, and then wonder, what now? What comes next? So too often that clinical process ends at the point of diagnosis, and that can leave the person to navigate that, what comes next completely on their own, and that's where Autism and Mind can fit in. So we are here to bridge that gap. So today, as I say, I want to talk to you about the work that we do in Northumberland to make sure that no matter how somebody feels about the diagnosis, they have a place where they can go and they are understood and they're validated and supported, and they're no longer kind of feeling so alone. So could I move on to the next slide, please? Thank you. So diagnosis, and most of us will probably be aware that the demand for autism assessments it's on the rise, and the number of people with an open referral for an autism assessment in England climbed from, it was around about 143,000 in the middle of 2023 to, as it says on the screen there, over 227,000 by September of last year. And most people on that list have waited longer than the recommended 13 weeks for assessment. So this kind of reflects that significant backlog in diagnostic services. And it's not necessarily that there are increases in the underlying prevalence of autism. Experts and researchers can attribute much of this kind of rise in trend to an increased awareness, and many adults, including those in their 30s and 40s and older, they're seeking a diagnosis later in life after being kind of overlooked in childhood. And there's also evidence that quite a large population of autistic adults still remain undiagnosed. which can potentially contribute to that kind of surge in adult referrals. And there's something that I'd kind of just really briefly like to pick up on, that is kind of really current, and it's recent media commentary by a particular professor who kind of lectures in autism, that you may or may not be aware of, but comments that kind of has suggested the surge in this adult diagnosis is reflecting an over expansion of the autism category. But we've got to be really careful not to mistake that kind of long overdue visibility for concept creep and the idea that everybody's a bit autistic, because that isn't true. And I'm going to talk about why that is through the course of the presentation today. So some kind of critics within the community and researchers, like Professor Tony Atwood, they argue that dismissing those people without the autistic people without a learning disability as just maybe eccentric or new or different, as the term that's sometimes used, it really ignores the high rates of mental health crises and burnout and suicide among this specific group. And the National Autistic Society also noted that, these adults, they're not a new phenomenon. They are a whole generation of people who were repeatedly missed by quite a narrow 20th century medical model of autism. So to suggest that their diagnosis is meaningless is to just deny the legal protections that diagnosis brings, and the really the life-saving and kind of self-understanding that formal diagnosis can provide. So I thought it was important to touch on that, because it is something that is kind of currently in the media. Well, it's kind of more at the beginning of the week. Media moves on quite quickly, but it's definitely there. So moving on to the next point on there. Isolation and anxiety are common. So for adults who have gone, decades without understanding why they might feel different, the path through life is often marked by a whole range of challenges. And some more research suggests that the vast majority, between 89 and 97% of autistic adults age 40 plus remain undiagnosed. And so this often leads to that, chronic feelings of isolation and higher rates of anxiety and depression. And we also see what's called diagnostic overshadowing. And this is where autistic traits they're misdiagnosed as other conditions like borderline personality disorder. So this kind of further delays understanding and appropriate support being in place. You can imagine living your whole life where you don't fit in, constantly kind of battling these internal struggles without any sort of framework to understand why. And what can be worse is with misdiagnosis, you might have a framework to understand why you're experiencing some challenges. But if that framework's incorrect, then those traditional treatments or therapies might not work. So you might see other people following a course of treatment, and it might work really well for them, but this can just end up as a double disappointment because it's something else that the person is failing at. It's just another therapy that hasn't worked or another medication that isn't right. It's something else to fail at. So that's another big problem, that kind of diagnostic overshadowing. And then the final point on the slide there, early help changes outcomes. And this is where autism and mind can make a difference. Even if early help in this context means earlier in the adult life, that timely diagnosis and support are transformative, because a formal diagnosis can provide really important workplace accommodations. It can help people to thrive in their careers. And more importantly, it offers that profound sense of self-understanding and validation. So it offers that framework. It's about, finally having a lens to kind of interpret your life, and the experiences that you've gone through, which can lead to improved well-being and reduced anxiety, and a stronger sense of personal identity, who you actually are, who you really are. And providing this understanding and support isn't just beneficial to the person, it can allow them to contribute more fully to, our Northumberland community. Can I move on to the next slide, please? Thank you. So I've talked a bit about diagnosis and the challenges that autistic adults face more broadly. And what I want to do now is zoom in and talk about why that matters so much here in Northumberland specifically, because place really does make a difference. Obviously, Northumberland it's a beautiful county, but it's also huge and rural in many areas, and it's not always easy to get around. So for many autistic adults, that geography can magnify the challenges that already exist. So we support people who live in small towns or villages where there might be quite limited public transport or fewer sort of informal social spaces, and there might be less services nearby. So just getting to support can be really stressful. There can be, getting to the support itself, unfamiliar journeys, there can be long travel times, sensory overload from those journeys, and that's before the support has even begun. So when we talk about isolation, we're not just talking about loneliness, we're talking about how much effort it can take just to exist in systems and in a world that wasn't designed with autistic people in mind. And that's why flexibility is so important in Northumberland. Offering online appointments, phone support, local venues, and not assuming that everybody can just, pop into town for some help. Another really important local factor can be age. So many of the autistic adults we work with in Northumberland grew up in a time when autism just wasn't recognised in the way it was now, especially if you were verbal, academically able, or good at masking. So people were labelled as anxious or difficult. Some were labelled as shy, oversensitive, or just not coping very well. So they learn to push through and hide parts of themselves to assume kind of that struggling was their own personal failing. So when diagnosis comes later in life, it often answers decades of those unanswered questions. But as I said, it can also open up a lot of grief and anger and a lot of what ifs. So without the right post-diagnostic support, people are left holding all of that on their own. And what tends to happen when that gap isn't filled is that people don't get support easily. They get it after, it would have been useful and when they reach crisis point, and mental health deteriorates and employment might break down, relationships can become strained. And the only doors left open then are kind of high threshold, high pressure services that were never designed to provide ongoing autism specific support. So low level preventative support doesn't sound particularly dramatic or fancy, but it's incredibly powerful. And I'm going to talk more about that through the course of the presentation. It means somebody can talk things through before they reach breaking point. And it means challenges are addressed while they are still manageable from, a system point of view that matters. But more importantly, it's from a human point of view. It means fewer people are reaching a place where everything feels like it's just too much. When autistic adults are supported to understand themselves better, the impact doesn't stop with the person themselves. People are more likely to stay in work or return to work in a way that's sustainable for them. Family relationships can improve because there's, the shared understanding, and people can feel more confident engaging in their communities as well on their own terms. So strong individuals can make strong communities, and when what we support is local, person-centered, and it's grounded in lived experience. Again, something else I'm going to talk about in the later in the presentation. But when we work in this way, that strength stays in Northumberland. So we often meet people in their 40s or 50s who've held life together for decades, jobs, families, responsibilities, but at a huge personal cost. So diagnosis can finally give them that missing context. And what people need next isn't more assessments. They need understanding, they need practical tools, and they need a space where they just don't have to explain themselves. And that's the space that we're trying to create. So when I talk about AIM and the work that we do, I want you to kind of hopefully see it as not just an extra, but it's a response to very real, very local needs. And that's what I'm going to kind of move on to next. So could I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So who we are, and hopefully we are part of the solution in addressing some of the challenges across the region. And it's important to be clear about the remit of AIM, quite near the beginning. AIM is a community interest company, and we specialise in supporting autistic adults who don't have a co-occurring learning disability. And this focus exists because this group is often sat between services, so maybe too old for children's provision and not always eligible for adult services that might have been primarily designed around learning disabilities or maybe higher threshold need. So our role is to address that gap, and we provide autism-specific preventative support for adults whose needs might otherwise just go unmet, particularly at the point of where that diagnosis comes and other services might end. While many of the people that we work with might have been diagnosed later in life, we absolutely welcome referrals from adults who have received that autism diagnosis in childhood. What matters it's not when somebody gets diagnosed, but it's whether they would benefit, and whether they would benefit from the type of post-diagnostic and community-based support that we offer. So our services are local and community embedded, and we currently provide support across quite a significant part of the Northeast. So as I said before, Sunderland, South Tyneside, North Tyneside, and Northumberland, which is why the work that I'm going to be talking about today is so relevant. And that regional presence allows us to deliver that accessible and place-based support that reflects the realities of the communities that we are here to serve. So in essence, AIM exists to provide understanding and guidance and community for autistic adults across Northumberland and beyond. So could I move on, please? Thank you. So as I said, the period following the diagnosis can be a lot to process. So we don't just provide information, we can help autistic adults to really understand and integrate their diagnosis into their identity. And the core of our work is about three things. So it's about building deeper self-awareness. Now, awareness is key to understanding and acceptance. Knowing that you think in a certain way, such as catastrophizing, it's all well and good, but understanding why you think in that way is a route to be able to help to begin manage it. Being aware of, that this is happening, why it's happening, that means you can take steps to make a change, which can lead on to the next point. We help to develop practical strategies for everyday life. So strategies that are tried and tested and have helped a whole range of autistic people. And ultimately helping people move forward with much greater confidence and control, which can have so many benefits, from promoting better physical health, mental health, and it can reduce the need for continued input from those higher level support services. And I think what really makes the support that we offer unique is who is delivering it, because our team consists of experienced professionals, many of whom are autistic themselves. And so this means that the approach that we take isn't clinical, it's lived and it's empathetic, and it's always strictly person-centered. We are not just talking about autism, we are there to understand it from the inside out. So yeah, moving on to the specifics of our Northumberland service. As I said, we're commissioned to provide that support which is specifically designed for autistic adults who don't have a learning disability. And we do recognise that group does kind of face a support gap often after the diagnosis. So were built to fill that space. And so to access the support, the person must be a resident in Northumberland or have a GP registered in Northumberland. And the referral process, hopefully we've made it as accessible as possible. So we can take self-referrals, and we welcome autistic adults to reach out to us directly. But you can do that through the website. You don't need to wait for a doctor or a social worker to act on your behalf. It can come through the website. And then professional referrals. If you're a professional, so GP, social worker, therapist, and you're supporting somebody who would benefit, we just ask that you would complete the professionals referral form. That's again accessible through the website. So, everything you need, all the links can be found on that referrals page of the website. So it is a straightforward process designed to get that support moving as quickly as possible. And in Northumberland, we're a small team. Actually, I'll move on to the next slide, please. Oh, sorry. This is a slide that's yeah, I'll stay on that one. We are a small team. There's three of us in Northumberland. There's myself, and there's Bo, and there's Becky. And what happens in that referral process is all of the referrals come to me because I'm the team lead in Northumberland. And then between the three of us, I triage the referrals, and then between the three of us, we speak to people directly. And usually that happens within a matter of a few days. So there's no waiting list for anything that we offer. Right, I'm ready to move on. Thank you. So our model is based around three words: connect, support, prevent. And this is looking at exactly what we do. And there are two main elements to the support that we provide in Northumberland. The first is something I've already touched on, which is low-level preventative support, or LLPS, we sometimes call it. And everything that we do is built around that connect, support, prevent model. So first we connect. We know that isolation is one of the biggest challenges for autistic adults. So we can prioritize creating spaces where people can find a community, and whether that is, whether it's a one-to-one individual low-level preventative support appointment, or it could be through the Me, Myself, and Autism sessions that we run, and I'm going to talk about. We connect with people to get to know them, and so that they can get to know us. And as I said, we're a small team, so it's not like a whole host of people, and you're not going to see a different person every time. We try to stick to the same person to have that consistency. And then, the support, that this low-level preventative support, it's flexible. It's flexible to what the person needs at the time. And we offer those one-to-one appointments that can take place online or over the phone, in person. It depends what the person's most comfortable with. So this support it's both emotional and practical. So we make sure that it's available outside of, or alongside, or even long after somebody completes the Me, Myself, and Autism course that I'm going to go on to talk about. And then that final pillar I talked about, and it's really at the heart of why we exist, and that is to prevent. Our goal is to prevent crisis. We recognize that the things that push an autistic adult towards crisis can be completely different to what a neurotypical person might expect. So by providing low-level practical or emotional support early on, we can help to manage those challenges before they escalate into something much more significant. So essentially, we provide, the safety net that often can be missing after diagnosis. And I'll just touch on a case study here. I think it's something I'd like to share to really kind of capture what low-level preventative support is, because it can be difficult to sum it up without giving an example of how it looks and how it can work. So I've got a case study that I'm going to kind of talk through about somebody that I worked with. I've anonymized it, so we're going to call this person Emma. And Emma is a young autistic woman who came along to her initial appointment with me. And as part of the discussion, I explained our remit, providing low-level preventative support and helping people to address those issues early on before they escalate. And when I mentioned this, Emma hesitated, and then she shared that there was something that she would like some support with because she'd been struggling with it for quite some time. So the issue was that Emma had been receiving a series of letters from HMRC, or Customs, HM Revenue and Customs, and the letters were telling her that she owed them money. And through a sort of gentle conversation, Emma explained what had happened. And so during COVID-19, the lockdown period, she had responded to a Facebook post offering help to access a free government grant. And so she was asked to provide personal details so that somebody could apply for this on her behalf. And then shortly afterwards, she received around about £100 into a bank account. And then not long after that, this is when Emma began receiving letters from HMRC. And these initial ones said that she was registered as self-employed. Now, Emma knew that she wasn't self-employed, so she presumed that there was some sort of admin error. And she didn't really know what to do about it, if she should do anything about it, so she did nothing. And then later she received another letter to tell her that she needed to complete self-assessment. And again, she thought this might have been a mistake, and not knowing what steps to take, she just ignored the letter. And then, the deadline passed, a penalty notice followed, and then further letters, and then increasing fines. And so what began as confusion gradually became overwhelming anxiety. And Emma had, without realizing, she'd been the victim of a scam. Somebody had fraudulently registered her as self-employed in order to claim that support grant in her name, and gave her a small amount of money so it looked legit, but took the rest. So over the kind of the months and the years, that situation escalated, and each of those unopened or unanswered letters just increased Emma's anxiety. For many autistic adults, official letters or ambiguous letters, and the fear of getting it wrong can create a really significant executive function barrier. So what might seem like quite a straightforward admin task can quite quickly become, impossible to fix. So, she described feeling overwhelmed, embarrassed, fearful of making the situation worse. And she just increasingly was unable to kind of engage with the problem. And this is exactly the type of scenario that low-level preventative support is designed to address. It's that preventable kind of issue steadily growing into something that could have resulted in debt enforcement, significant financial hardship, significant mental health deterioration as well. So we agreed on a plan. So we would gather together all of that correspondence from HMRC. We'd book a follow-up appointment, and then together we would contact HMRC to clarify the situation and agree on any sort of next steps. So at the follow-up appointment, Emma brought the letters, and it came the time to call HMRC, and she just found she wasn't able to speak. So, she was just so anxious, she lost her words. She was in that situation. She became mute. So with her consent, I explained the situation on her behalf. And the response from HMRC was so helpful, calm, it was pragmatic. Once the circumstances were explained, they deregistered Emma as being self-employed. They recognised that there was fraudulent activity, and they cancelled those outstanding penalties and debts. So the entire issue, which had been causing this prolonged anxiety and avoidance, was resolved within an hour. So what had felt catastrophic and completely unmanageable to Emma was in reality it was solvable with the right support at the right time. So obviously, Emma, after that, she spoke about the immediate relief she felt, reduced anxiety, increased confidence in reaching out for support. And I think that's a big one that can come from that. And then a better understanding of how she can respond to similar issues in the future, knowing that it is fixable. And importantly, it really prevented escalation into any sort of formal debt recovery or more intensive mental health support needs. So I think this sort of case can highlight a few key themes in what we do, that autistic adults without a learning disability might appear highly capable, yet they can still experience significant executive function and barriers. When people avoid things, often it can be rooted in anxiety. It's not indifference, it's that inability to do something. We know that scams disproportionately affect people who may take communication at face value. So really just believe the things that they're being told. And those sometimes small, tiny interventions can prevent a major crisis escalating. So hopefully this can kind of demonstrate that real tangible value of low-level preventative support, a situation that had been escalating for years with mountain fines and that growing sort of psychological impact. It was resolved in under an hour through that structured support and kind of informal advocacy. And so without that intervention, Emma's case would have progressed down a really, bad road for her, but we were able to help her get it sorted. And low-level preventative support, it's not about always doing things for people. It's about enabling them to navigate the systems that weren't necessarily designed with that neurodivergent process and style in mind. Emma didn't and doesn't need long-term intervention. She needed one supported conversation, and that made all the difference to her. Could I move on to the next slide, please? Oh, sorry, I've done that one. Right, okay, me, myself, and autism. So I've mentioned this already. It's not just another training course. It's an 8-week course. It's self-awareness, and it's designed specifically for adults who have had an autism diagnosis. As I mentioned earlier, some of the people that we support might receive that diagnosis as a child, and we're very happy to support them doing me, myself, and autism. But somebody who gets that diagnosis in adulthood can feel like, a massive question has been answered and things have finally clicked into place, but they don't necessarily know how to look at the rest of the picture, how to look at the bigger picture. So over the 8 weeks, we look at what being autistic actually means for them as an individual. So we look at sensory processing, why certain environments can feel painful or exhausting. We look at how we think, how we communicate, how we can practice better self-care. And then at the end of the course, we even have a dedicated session for friends and family, because we know that support works best when people around you understand the world that you're living in as well. And the most important thing to know about me, myself, and autism, and that it's co-written and it's co-delivered by autistic adults. It isn't clinical experts talking at people. It's people with lived experience sharing their own insights that actually work in everyday life, whether it's in person, which usually takes place in Cramlington, or whether it's kind of delivered virtually, we use Teams. The goal is the same, helping people to move from that, I have a diagnosis, to, I understand and I value who I am. The course is not, absolutely not about teaching anybody how to fit in or how, what society expects. It's allowing people to accept those parts of themselves that they might have found really difficult over the years, and understanding that there is a reason in that different neurology that autistic people have. There's a reason for those things, and understanding there's a reason and why those things might be difficult can really help the person to accept those in themselves. I am coming to the end of the presentation soon. I just wanted to mention that I've spoken that it's co-written and the course co-written, facilitated by autistic people. So you might have heard of the term co-production. It's it's used a lot in the work that we do, but it's not just a buzzword. It's in the DNA of what we do. We live by that mantra, nothing about us without us. And that means in practice that we don't sit in a room and decide what is best for autistic people. Instead, everything that we offer is designed and built and often delivered by autistic adults themselves. Um, yeah, I'll move on to the next. Oh, sorry, I should have asked you to move on that one. Move on again, please. Thank you. Workshops. And this is one of the additional things that we offer, because one of the things that we hear after people have done the course, talk about how they feel they've really benefited from doing the course and understanding them, but then not necessarily know what happens then, what happens next. And we're really, really fortunate with Autism in Mind that we don't have that cliff edge to the service. There's not an arbitrary number of weeks where the support ends there. Our support is kind of ad hoc as and when people need it. The course is limited to 8 weeks, but then we have these extra things, these workshops after. And we realize that while, the core of the course provides that foundation to understanding autism, life is complex. And there are some specific areas where some people need a bit of a deep dive into a topic. And that's why we've launched the series of extended learning workshops. And they're a rolling program for anybody who's completed that initial Me, Myself, and Autism course, where we focus on really specific, real world hurdles that autistic adults can face every day. So, for example, we look at perfectionism, and this can be really difficult and a big barrier to employment, and well-being for many autistic clients. We have a session on assertiveness and boundaries, given that the actual language to advocate for your own needs in your home or your workplace. We have a session on interoception, which helps people understand those internal bodily signals like hunger or thirst or stress before they reach a point of overwhelm. And again, the workshops aren't academic, they're practical. They're about building a sort of personalized toolkit. So by the time somebody's moved through the Me, Myself, and Autism course and these workshops, they're not just more informed, but many people talk about feeling more resilient, more confident, and much better equipped to navigate a world that wasn't necessarily built with them in mind. Next slide, please. Finally, I'd like to highlight the wellbeing sessions that we hold. And these sessions are specifically designed for autistic adults who might feel socially isolated or who find it difficult to access traditional sort of peer support groups in the wider community. So we know that navigating those neurotypical social spaces can be really exhausting and confusing. So we've created hopefully the exact opposite. So the wellbeing sessions provide a safe and I'd like to think a genuinely welcoming space where you can meet up and engage with other autistic people without the pressure to mask or to fit in. So, it's a group-based thing. We focus on supporting your emotional well-being through, just general discussion, sharing experiences and navigating the kind of challenges of life together. And then connection. So it's just kind of providing that low pressure environment just to get to know the people. And often the most impactful part of these sessions is the environment. It's not, the slide says, it's not just about having a space to be around other autistic people. And it can be really powerful having that community and having that availability of kind of your peers and other autistic people who understand and validate your own experiences. And it can help to remind you that you're not alone. And then the last slide, please. Maybe it's not moving on. That's okay. It should be in the slides that come out. And it's just to kind of sum up what I've spoken about. Understanding autism can be developed through really a single principle. It's that behavior makes sense in context. Um, Thank you. So autistic people are often navigating environments or systems and expectations that just weren't designed with their neurology in mind. So when we talk about support, we're not talking about fixing somebody. We're talking about understanding them. So, you know, try and understand them before judgment. If somebody tells you that a supermarket is physically painful, or if they say a phone call can feel impossible, or if they describe exhaustion after a social interaction, even if that's not your experience, doesn't make it incorrect. Support begins with sort of questioning and curiosity rather than correction. So you could ask questions like, help me to understand what that feels like for you, or what would make this situation easier? What's happening in the moment to make you feel this way? And acceptance is really important. Acceptance means recognizing that autistic communication, sensory processing, and emotional regulation might look different, but it's not wrong. So what we encourage in the sessions that we deliver, we encourage clear and direct communication. Predictability and structure can be really, really beneficial to take some of the anxiety out of life. Reduced sensory load where possible, and that respect for processing time. Some autistic people might need longer to process. Doesn't mean that they're any less if they take a bit longer to process. Just means the brain's working harder because it's having to do more. So small adjustments can prevent a big crisis. And then just to touch on the double empathy perspective at the bottom, the idea of double empathy, it reminds us that misunderstanding can go both ways. It's not that autistic people lack empathy. It's that autistic people and non-autistic people's experiences of the world are different. So miscommunication is often it's a mutual thing, and that support means at least meeting in the middle. A good way to describe the double empathy perspective, or the double empathy problem, as it's sometimes called. There's a sort of an idea that is described by one of our directors, Carol, and she talks about, imagine you're sitting next to somebody on a roller coaster, and imagine they absolutely love roller coasters and you don't, but you're there. And so the anticipation of that going up for that other person is excitement. For you, it's anxiety and fear. And then you go around and you feel awful, and that person's having the time of their life. You've both experienced exactly the same thing, but your perception of that feels very, very different. And I think that's a really helpful way to understand that different perception that autistic people can have of the world than non-autistic people. So the work that we do, whether it's low-level preventative support or programs like Me, Myself, and Autism, they're rooted in validation, collaboration over kind of trying to control people, and empowerment over, dependence. Because, just because you don't experience something the way somebody else does, it doesn't mean that you're wrong. It means that your nervous system and processing style and lived experience are different. And understanding that difference is often the first and the most powerful form of support that we can provide for autistic adults. And I've come to the end. I'm going to pass back over to Helen because I think there may be some questions.
Yeah, thanks so much for that, Howard. While we're waiting for some more questions to come in, we have had one question about the post-diagnostic kind of support. So I
Yeah.
know that obviously it is a post-diagnostic service in Northumberland, but are there any of the elements of the service that can be accessed sort of pre-diagnosis or while someone's waiting for a diagnosis?
Yeah. At the moment in Northumberland, no. It's the commission is a post-diagnosis service only. In other areas there are pre-diagnostic support. So for example, in South Tyneside and Sunderland, the commission's slightly different there. So we're able to offer a short course around understanding autism, but that's for residents of those areas, unfortunately.
Sounds like there's a bit of a gap there. I know obviously it's a commission, but I think as you're saying with all the, sort of waiting times, sort of as
Mm.
there are, I know there are other I guess, kind of services like the Recovery College who, sort of have some peer support groups. I think, like you say, that's really important, that kind of peer support, isn't it?
Yeah.
I was struck by having a conversation with someone once, an autistic adult who was saying that actually in a room full of other, sort of autistic adults, doesn't have that anxiety of, sort of being judged and actually just, sort of not having a mask and all those things. So I think that's really, really important.
Well, that's that double empathy idea, that autistic people can communicate kind of more easily with other autistic people because there's that shared experience of the world. And whilst everybody is an individual and everybody's different, there are some, unwritten rules around life for autistic people and non-autistic people. And it's a bit like, two people who both get migraines, for example, will know without kind of saying to each other, well, I get this and I get this and I feel like this. They will just know how each other kind of experiences the migraine. So when somebody said, I'm getting a migraine coming on, the other person knows without having to say all of those things, knows there are certain things that the person with the migraine is going to need. And I think it can be the same with neurodivergence. It's that understand things like anxiety tend to be there all of the time. And when you don't feel constant anxiety, you will never know what constant anxiety feels like because we all know what anxiety feels like, but unless you experience constant anxiety, you're never going to know what it feels like.
Has anyone got any other questions? Please do pop them in the chat and we'll get to them. How long have you been running for now, Howard?
So commissioned in Northumberland since 2023. So kind of 3 years this year up here. North Tyneside, I think was this year, earlier this year, so it's very new. Uh, Sunderland, I believe, has been commissioned for 11 years, but and South Tyneside was 2020, so 6 years in South Tyneside. But Autism and Mind as an organisation has existed since the year 2000. I was trying to remember that since the year 2000 was founded. It started off as a voluntary organisation for kind of a group of parents, I think, that had got together.
Oh, thanks for that. I know that within the presentation that we're going to send round, you've got links to your website for further information
Yeah.
about, sort of services and things like that. We'll
That's
just give it a few minutes just in case people do want to pop any, sort of questions in the chat because we've got a bit of time left. So wellbeing groups, do they run sort of across the county? Is it kind of in particular areas that the
so yeah, at the moment, they are in Cramlington. So we have the details are on the website, but it's the last Friday of the month between 1 and 3. Um, but we are looking, I'm going over to Hexham next month um, to run it's kind of an open day drop-in session
Mhm.
to just kind of meet some autistic people over there if they want to come and talk about the service and then we can we're kind of looking at maybe running a course there and having a bit more of a presence there. We were up in Berwick back end of last year, September to December. We ran a course up in Berwick, so we do try and travel around it to make sure we're meeting need in different areas.
So it'd be great to kind of get further groups up and running, wouldn't it? Maybe we
Yeah.
could alongside sending out the slides, pop that, sort of out to the people, sort of here that where you're going to be in Hexham so that they can kind of
Yes.
come and drop in, if you're there
Yeah,
in
yeah.
case you've got any questions. So that would be
I've
good.
got a flyer I can share with you. That would be great.
Fabulous. No, that would be great. And I think probably some of us will be around as well. So we might pop in and say, sort of
Lovely.
hi. No, that all sounds, sort of really great. You maybe just answered everybody's questions because there doesn't seem to be any coming in. Oh, we've got one here. Can the weekly sessions for the course be accessed solely on Teams because work commitments make it difficult to attend face to face? So are
Yeah.
there any options online?
Yeah, everything that we do can be done. The wellbeing sessions that we don't have an online wellbeing session at the moment, but low level support, um, the course that we run, they can both be accessed online. It's the way the sessions work is they last about 2.5 hours. It was between 2.5 hours with breaks, and they happen once per week. And we can write a letter to your employer if you wanted us to, that you can share to kind of ask them to support you to have the time off to do the session. But yes, they can be accessed completely through Teams. Some people, it can be arranged. Some people struggle in terms of work, but some people struggle just getting out of the house because of the anxiety that can be around being around other people. So being in your own space can be really important for some people to be able to process what we're talking about.
Yeah. Oh no, that's really, really great. So there's just a few people kind of saying, thanks, and someone who said actually, that's a really good offer about the help with the employers. So um someone's asking, the wellbeing session that's in the Cramlington Community Hub, is it only for people who have the diagnosis? But obviously this is for someone who's waiting for support whilst awaiting, sort of diagnosis.
Yeah.
Um, do you know of any support whilst awaiting diagnosis? And I know that there's recovery college groups, but I'm not sure if they are fully subscribed at the moment. I'm sure there's
Oh,
probably people on the call who might be able to answer that. But what we'll do is alongside when we put out the slides, we'll put out the information for the Recovery College as well, and the peer groups that run there. It might be a case of registering, and then if there are a waiting list, for that, then obviously, sort of it that'll come up. But we'll send that out as well. I'll write a note to myself to send that out. Um, and that's great. And I guess it's just around any other support for neurodiverse. Perhaps what we'll do alongside the slides is just pop in any other links that we've got for people for support. I think the fact that there's been so many people attended today shows that there's a real, sort of need for this type of support.
mhm.
And there is a bit of a, sort of a gap there, sort of they obviously, it's great that you're filling, but there's also that pre-diagnosis as well, isn't there? That
Yeah.
sort of would be great if we could, sort of get more support. But as you say, that's a commissioner decision, isn't it? So we've got, let's just see. We've got someone from Recovery College saying groups aren't full at the moment, so we'll definitely get that
Okay.
around about the sort of the autism peer support groups through the Recovery College. We'll send that out when we send out the slides as well. So thanks very much for clarifying that.
Great.
Just a question around proof of diagnosis, because obviously it's a post-diagnostic service, but people might have been diagnosed, sort of years before.
Yeah.
How are you flexible with that?
We do ask to see the copy of the diagnosis letter, but some people have lost them,
Yeah.
and where we do have a pragmatic view on that. So it's not a deal breaker if the person can't find their proof of diagnosis.
Yeah, because I'm guessing some people might have been diagnosed like years ago as children, and maybe
Yeah,
haven't had that support and they're still needing support, sort
yeah.
of through to adulthood. So, that's great. So all the
The, I mean,
contact details will be sent on. Sorry, go on, Howard.
I was just going to say that, I mean, there have been instances where people have been diagnosed as a child and then their parents never told them. I'm just thinking about a particular person that I supported quite some time ago. The parents never told the person about the diagnosis, and then they were quite shocked to find out through their GP records that they had an autism diagnosis.
Right. Wow. That must be
Yeah.
really shocking for people to
Mhm.
kind of, yeah.
Yeah, so not everybody will have access to their letter.
Yeah, no, no, that's great. And it sounds like the support on offer is quite flexible. So if you wanted to sort of attend, the wellbeing sessions, but you didn't necessarily want to do, sort of the full course, you can kind of, yeah, okay. So
Everything that we do is optional. It's there's I mean obviously there's no cost attached to anything that we do, but yeah, it's built around the people that we are there to support. So if you just want to come to wellbeing sessions, then that's okay. That's not a problem at all. The only thing that we have to have first is an initial appointment, and we do that with everybody so we can get to know you and you can find out more about us. But after that, you don't have to do the course. You don't have to have any low-level support. For some people, it's just a monthly catch-up at the wellbeing session.
no, that's great. We had a question in about have you heard of I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, Autie Pocket or Outie Pocket? Have you heard of
No.
anything like that? It's like a I don't know what that is. maybe it's an app that's kind of sort of support for autistic adults. I don't know.
I'll have to
Um,
look it up.
what we'll do, as I say, because the National Autistic Society, I think, is a real wealth of information as well, isn't it? For
Yeah,
resources and support, and I'm sure they've got national sort of national support, and they've got resources, they've got information. So we'll put all of that information, sort of there as well. Um, yeah. Oh, so the Out Your Pocket I've just Googled is a free workplace support app for neurodivergent employees. So that might be something for people to
oh yeah, we'll have to look
like
that up.
look at.
Thank
Yeah,
you
thank
for the
you.
person that put into
Yeah,
the
thank you
chat.
for that. Um, just going to scroll down. Yeah, again, some questions around, I guess, pre-diagnosis. I think there's that's really struck a chord, I think, with people,
Yeah.
understandably, sort of access to pre-diagnosis guidance and support would be really useful. Um, and then that might also help people navigate the post-diagnostic support. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's something that we can um, send some links out to. So thanks very much for raising that.
I, yeah, I think it's really helpful to hear how that just in the group of people here, the appetite for pre-diagnostic support is
Yeah,
there, and it's I mean we know there's a need, but you know resources are resources, and they can't be everywhere all at once, and um, but in terms of what we commission to do, we absolutely kind of we're doing we're doing kind of uh, the kind of the work that we do, it's reaching the right people, hopefully, and by doing things like this, hopefully I can reach more people than the open day in Hexham and the open day we have in Berwick. The aim is to kind of reach as many people as possible, but I do see that there is that pre-diagnostic support
yeah,
needed there. We absolutely do see that, and it's something that we can offer potentially in the future, but it's just not something that's kind of commissioned at the moment.
yeah. Well, that's maybe something, where there's a role for Health Watch, I guess, in terms of, sort of gathering that appetite as well for, sort of that pre-diagnostic support. And as you say, if the waiting lists, are naturally kind of very long, it would make a lot of sense, wouldn't it, for people to
Mhm.
get some support, sort of in the meantime. So, thank you so much, everybody, for coming along today. As I say, we'll get some information sent out. Along with the slides. The recording will be available to pass on to family, sort of friends, colleagues, everything else as of next week. Keep an eye out for any future online sessions that we have. We're having a break in April, but we're back in May. And thank you ever so much, Howard, for presenting for us
No,
today.
thank
It's been
you.
really, really great. Thanks for
Thank you
coming
very much.
along. Have a lovely weekend, everybody. And we've already had one person saying that they'll make a referral in, so that's really, really
Ah,
good.
good.
Yeah. Thanks,
Good, good.
everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for being with us.
Bye. Bye.